Tonight, we uncover the shocking truth about Five Guys in America. A California customer says she ordered a completely regular cheeseburger, felt fine for a few hours, and then got so violently sick while driving home that she had to pull over on the highway. Another customer in Washington state says she personally watched an employee sweep the restaurant floor while wearing food handling gloves, then walk straight over to the counter and start touching burger toppings with those exact same gloves, without ever changing them. And on top of all of that, customers walking up to the self-order kiosk to pay for food they built entirely themselves and are about to carry to their own table are now being asked to leave a tip before they even get their receipt. And $23.10. That's what one customer paid for a single bacon cheeseburger, a small fry, and a drink at a standard American Five Guys. And when that receipt hit the internet, it didn't just go viral, it became the defining meme of an entire fast food brand for an entire generation of shoppers. And that's just the walk-in experience. One customer claimed a single burger and fries cost $42 through Uber Eats, only for the bun to arrive so soggy that they repeatedly described the entire thing as mush. If any single one of those stories stopped you in your tracks, you're not alone, and there's a lot more where that came from. Some of you remember a very different version of this place. Sometime back in the 2000s, word started spreading about this loud, no-frills burger counter with the red and white checkered tiles, a barrel of free peanuts sitting right by the front door, and a paper bag so overloaded with fries that it practically tore open before you even got back to the car. It felt like a real discovery, the kind you'd tell your coworkers about on a Monday morning. A restaurant that seemed to genuinely care more about the food than the marketing budget, back when a burger, fries, and a drink didn't require a second mortgage just to enjoy. And for a long stretch, Five Guys earned every bit of that reputation fair and square. It grew from a handful of stores in Virginia into a nationwide obsession, and it did it almost entirely through word of mouth, one satisfied customer telling the next. But today, that same overloaded bag of fries and a single burger can easily run you north of $30. And it's a big part of why sales at Five Guys have dropped more than 10% from their peak, with locations shutting their doors in states all across the country. So what actually happened to the burger chain that once had a sitting president walking in to grab lunch for his staff? So we've researched and gone through all the latest information about Five Guys in the United States, and we'll expose the 8 things you must know before you eat at Five Guys again. Before we get into it, hit that like button and smash the hype button below. It genuinely helps get this kind of consumer research in front of more American shoppers. And the more people who see it, the more pressure companies feel to actually maintain their standards, instead of quietly letting them slide. Let's get into it. Number 8. The $30 meal reality. Let's start with the number that started this entire conversation across the country, because it's the very first thing nearly every single customer brings up. More than the food itself, more than the service, more than anything else on this list. A trip to Five Guys for 2 people, 2 burgers, 2 fries, and 2 drinks regularly runs $50 or more these days. A single cheeseburger by itself, before you've added a single side or a drink, can push past $15 or even $20, depending on where in the country you happen to live. Families have described spending close to what a real sit-down dinner would cost them, except they bust their own table, carried their own tray, and never once spoke to an actual server the entire time. Here's the part that a lot of first-time customers genuinely don't realize until they're already standing at the register holding a receipt that doesn't quite make sense to them. At most fast food chains, when you order a regular cheeseburger, you get 1 patty. At Five Guys, a regular cheeseburger automatically comes with 2 patties as the default. If you actually want a single patty, you have to specifically ask for what the menu calls a little burger, and most first-timers simply don't know that trick exists. Combine that with the fries, where the small size gets filled all the way to the top of the cup and then gets an entire second scoop dumped straight into the bag. And you can end up walking out with a genuinely enormous amount of food from what sounded like a completely ordinary order. None of that is hidden from you. It's all sitting right there on the menu if you know exactly where to look for it. but it explains a huge part of the sticker shock that people keep talking about online. You're not just paying more for the same size meal you'd get somewhere else down the street. In a lot of cases, you're paying more for a meal that's already noticeably bigger than the one you were picturing in your head when you walked through the door. And here's the twist that stings the most for longtime fans of the brand. What a Five Guys meal for two costs roughly the same as a genuine sit-down meal at a place like Texas Roadhouse or Red Robin, complete with actual table service and, in Red Robin's case, bottomless fries that keep coming. Five Guys simply isn't competing against other fast food chains anymore. It's competing directly against casual dining. And more often, it's losing that particular fight. Plenty of longtime fans have made almost this exact comparison out loud, pointing out that a Chili's or a Texas Roadhouse can put a full meal with real service and a real seat in front of you for close to the same total on the receipt. That's not a small thing to lose to. That's an entire category of restaurant Five Guys now has to justify itself against every single time someone decides where to eat. Number 7, the tip prompt nobody asked for. Walk into a Five Guys today, and in a growing number of locations, you're not talking to a cashier at all anymore. You're standing at a self-order kiosk, punching in your own order line by line, carrying your own tray to the table, and bussing that same table yourself once you're finished eating. That's the standard trade-off at most fast casual counters these days, and plenty of customers are perfectly fine with that arrangement in exchange for genuinely lower prices. Except at Five Guys, right before your card actually gets charged, that same kiosk turns around and asks you to leave a tip for an order you built completely by yourself, paid full price for, and are about to carry to your own table without a single ounce of table service involved. Longtime customers have pointed out again and again just how backwards that sequence feels once you stop and think about it. You're doing the job a server used to do for you, and you're still being asked to pay extra for the privilege of doing it yourself. Five Guys certainly isn't the only fast casual chain experimenting with this kind of prompt right now. Plenty of others have added similar screens. But for a restaurant already charging some of the highest prices in its entire category, that tip prompt lands very differently than it would somewhere genuinely cheap. It's a small moment, maybe 5 seconds total at the register, but it's become one of the most talked about parts of the entire ordering experience among regular customers. And it quietly sets the tone for a lot of what's still ahead on this list. You're already paying more than you expected walking in, and somehow you're also being asked to do more of the actual labor yourself. Number 6, the bag that started a small rebellion. For decades, the Five Guys Fry Cup was basically part of the company's logo, as recognizable as the checkered tiles themselves. You'd order a small, they'd fill that paper cup completely to the brim, and then an employee would take a second scoop and just dump it straight into the bag on top. No charge, just a quiet tradition everybody understood. It became the entire identity of the brand in a lot of customers' minds. You weren't just buying fries. You felt like you were getting a genuine bonus that nobody else in fast food gave you for free. Earlier this year, Five Guys quietly swapped that iconic cup out for a new paper bag, saying the change was about sustainability and about keeping the fries fresher for longer during takeout and delivery orders. The company was very clear in its public messaging that portion sizes hadn't changed one bit as part of the switch. But almost immediately, customers across the country started saying the exact opposite online. Bags that used to be stuffed to the brim suddenly looked noticeably thinner and flatter. Grease started soaking straight through the paper and onto car seats and laps in a way the old cups had always managed to prevent. The backlash actually got loud enough that it made national news coverage, with customers openly using the word shrinkflation to describe what they were seeing. One customer got curious enough to actually put a kitchen scale to it, ordering 5 separate large fries over the course of a few months and weighing every single one at home before eating. Every single order came in well under what Five Guys' own published nutrition information listed as the average weight for that size portion. Now, that's one person's personal experiment, not a controlled scientific study. And Five Guys has maintained publicly and repeatedly that nothing about the actual portions changed. But when your own loyal customers start bringing kitchen scales into an argument about your French fries, that tells you something important about how much trust is genuinely left in the room between the brand and its base. Number 5. The same restaurant, two completely different experiences. One of the strangest things about eating at Five Guys is just how differently the exact same order can turn out depending entirely on which location you happen to walk into on any given day. Customers describe getting a hot, juicy burger built exactly the way they asked for it at one store, and then getting a dry, overcooked patty with the wrong toppings entirely at another location, just a few miles down the road. Some of that inconsistency comes down to a simple structural fact. Almost every single Five Guys restaurant in the country is independently owned and operated. Corporate headquarters sets the standards on paper, publishes the training manuals, and runs periodic inspections, but a local franchise owner runs the actual day-to-day business, hires the crew, and manages the budget out of their own pocket. That means one location might run a tight, well-trained kitchen with a manager who genuinely takes pride in the product, while another might be understaffed and quietly cutting corners just to survive a busy Friday night rush without falling apart. Before getting angry at the teenager behind the counter, it's worth remembering that a lot of these problems trace directly back to staffing levels and workload, rather than any individual worker simply not caring about doing their job well. A rushed employee working a slammed dinner shift with two people missing from the schedule that night isn't going to hit the same standard as a fully staffed crew coasting through a slow Tuesday afternoon with time to spare. The franchise model that let Five Guys explode from a handful of stores in Virginia into more than 1,500 locations nationwide is the exact same model that makes your individual experience something of a gamble every single time you walk through the door. No matter how many times you've been to a Five Guys before, you could get the best burger of your life that afternoon. You could just as easily get someone else's order and cold fries sitting at the bottom of the bag. Number 4. When customers say something went seriously wrong. Search through customer reviews for Five Guys locations across the country, and a genuinely disturbing pattern starts to emerge the longer you look. Not in every single review, and not even in most of them, but often enough that it's worth talking about honestly rather than quietly sweeping it under the rug. Some customers describe getting violently sick within hours of eating there, with symptoms severe enough that they say they'll never set foot in the restaurant again for the rest of their lives. One California customer described exactly that kind of reaction after what she called a completely normal cheeseburger order, eaten with nothing more than the standard toppings. Another customer in the Bay Area says that she and two other people in her party all got sick after eating at the very same location during the very same visit, which is harder to write off as pure coincidence. To be fair and clear here, a customer getting sick sometime after a meal doesn't automatically prove that the restaurant was the actual cause. Food poisoning can come from almost anywhere, and Five Guys has denied that its food made anyone ill in cases like these. But it isn't only about reported illness. One reviewer in Washington state described watching an employee sweep the restaurant floor while wearing food handling gloves, and then walk directly to the front counter and start touching burger toppings with those very same gloves without changing them at any single point in between. That isn't a food poisoning claim at all. That's something a customer says she personally witnessed happen right in front of her own eyes. Five Guys operates well over 1,000 locations across the entire country, and any chain of that size is inevitably going to have individual restaurants that fall short of the standard on any given day. That's simply the math of scale. In states that track health inspection data publicly, the chain's overall pass rate is actually reported to be better than the state average, which is a genuinely fair point in the company's favor worth mentioning. But that broader statistical context doesn't erase what individual customers say happened to them in specific stores on specific days. And it's exactly the kind of thing worth knowing before you decide where to take your family for dinner tonight. It's also worth saying plainly that Five Guys has, in these cases, pointed back to its own internal food safety training and its overall inspection numbers as evidence that these accounts don't reflect how the company expects its restaurants to run. That response deserves to be heard alongside the complaints, even if it doesn't erase what individual customers say they personally experienced. Number 3. The birthday deal that broke the entire company. Back in February of this year, Five Guys turned 40 years old, and to celebrate, the chain rolled out a buy one, get one free burger promotion across the entire country, all on the same day. What happened next genuinely surprised even the people running the company from the very top. Leadership had planned around maybe a 20% bump in ordinary traffic for the day. What they actually got was closer to 130%, more than 6 times what they'd braced for. Stores across the country ran completely out of food within hours. Some locations had to shut their doors early, turning away customers who'd driven across town for the deal. The app and the online ordering system broke down entirely under the sheer volume of demand hitting all at once. Customers stood in long lines outside restaurants, only to be turned away with absolutely nothing to show for the wait. Five Guys' own founder later admitted publicly, in plain and pretty blunt language, that the company had badly screwed up the planning from the very start. Here's the twist, though, because this is where the story actually gets interesting, rather than just embarrassing. Instead of quietly letting the whole episode fade away the way most companies would, Five Guys did something you genuinely don't see very often from a chain that size. They wrote checks totaling roughly $1.5 million, distributed to employees at every single one of their 1,500 North American stores, specifically to thank the crews who got completely steamrolled trying to keep up with that promotion. That's a real, tangible response to a bad situation, not just a public apology and nothing else behind it. But look closely at what the disaster itself actually revealed underneath the surface, because it matters for everything else on this list. Underneath every other complaint here, the pricing frustration, the inconsistency from store to store, the tip prompts at the register. There's still an enormous number of Americans who genuinely want to eat at Five Guys the very moment it becomes a good deal again. This isn't a company that's struggling because people secretly dislike the food deep down. It's struggling because of what happens the other 360-some days of the year when the burger isn't free. Number 2. The empire caught in the middle. Five Guys built its entire identity around being the highest quality option in the entire burger world. Full stop. No freezers anywhere in the kitchen. Fresh ground beef handled by hand every single morning. Potatoes cut by hand right there in the store every single day without exception, rain or shine. For years, that strategy worked beautifully because Five Guys was competing against a fast food landscape that was mostly frozen, reheated, and mass-produced somewhere in a distant central warehouse. But something significant shifted in the market around Five Guys over the last decade or so. On one end of the spectrum, In-N-Out Burger stayed privately owned by the very same family for generations, kept its prices genuinely low the entire time, and never once sold off a single franchise to an outside operator, allowing it to grow slowly while protecting both its quality and its affordability at the exact same time. On the completely opposite end of the spectrum, Shake Shack leaned all the way into becoming a premium, almost upscale burger brand, with pricing to match that positioning, deliberately aimed at customers who won't blink twice at spending $25 on a single burger and a fancy side. Five Guys ended up stuck squarely in the middle of those two very different winning strategies. Too expensive to compete with In-N-Out on everyday value for a family, and not quite polished enough to compete with Shake Shack on prestige and overall experience. That painful squeeze is a real and measurable part of why locations have been closing in states including California, Florida, Illinois, and several others, just over the past year alone, even while the company insists publicly that it isn't going anywhere and continues to grow as a brand overall worldwide. Being caught directly in the middle of two very different winning strategies is a genuinely difficult position for any restaurant chain to survive in over the long run, no matter how good the actual burger tastes on any given day. There's actually something almost admirable buried in this part of the story if you step back far enough to see it. Five Guys never took the easy way out. It never started freezing its patties or switching to cheaper oil just to protect its margins the way a lot of chains quietly do when times get tough. It stayed loyal to the exact recipe that built the brand in the first place, even as the world around it changed shape entirely. That loyalty is arguably the most respectable thing about this entire company, And it's also, in a strange way, the thing that's now working against it. Number 1. What happened behind the counter in California? In 2023, Five Guys finally finalized a legal settlement worth $1.2 million connected to a lawsuit filed by workers in California years earlier. The case, which took years and multiple rejected attempts before a judge would finally approve it, involved more than 2,000 employees who said they weren't given the meal breaks, rest breaks, and overtime pay they were legally owed under California labor law. It's important to say clearly and directly that this was a settlement, not a court ruling that formally found the company guilty of any wrongdoing. And Five Guys did not admit fault as part of the final agreement, but it's still genuinely worth knowing about, because it puts those cheerful stories about above-average starting wages in a slightly different light once you sit with it. And to be fair, that wage part is real and deserves credit. Five Guys crews often do start a couple dollars above minimum wage compared to a lot of other fast food competitors in the same market. And that's genuinely worth acknowledging as a point in the company's favor. But higher pay written on paper doesn't mean a whole lot in practice if workers aren't actually receiving the breaks they're legally entitled to while they're earning it. The kitchen itself is genuinely demanding physical work. Make no mistake about that. Employees are lifting 50-pound sacks of potatoes off delivery trucks, working shoulder to shoulder, next to grills running non-stop through an entire lunch rush, all while every single mistake happens in full view of customers standing right there watching the whole thing unfold in real time. That's a hard job to do, well, even under ideal conditions. And it becomes a lot harder when the basic breaks the law requires aren't consistently being honored on the ground, no matter what the employee handbook says on paper. It's a fitting place to end this countdown, because it ties every other complaint on this list back to the same root cause. A company built around doing things the harder, more labor-intensive way, fresh beef, fresh potatoes, hand-formed patties, franchise owners running their own books, is also a company where that same complexity makes it harder to guarantee consistency, harder to keep prices in check, and harder to make sure every single worker at every single location is being treated exactly the way corporate headquarters promises on paper. Before we get into what Five Guys still does right, here's some practical advice if you're planning on eating there again anyway. Check recent reviews for your specific location before you order, since quality really can vary that dramatically from one store to the next, even within the same city. If you actually want real value out of your visit, order the little burger instead of the regular, since most people genuinely can't finish a double patty in one sitting anyway. And load up on the free toppings while you're at it, since those never cost you a single extra cent, no matter how many you choose to pile on. And if something genuinely goes wrong with your order, take a photo, document it, and go through Five Guys' official customer service channels directly, rather than just quietly eating the loss and never saying a word about it. Now, here's what Five Guys still genuinely gets right, because a list like this wouldn't be an honest one without saying so clearly. First, the beef itself is refreshingly simple, and that matters more than it sounds. Five Guys uses 80/20 ground chuck with no fillers, no additives, and absolutely nothing frozen anywhere in the building at any point. In an industry full of mystery meat blends and ingredient lists longer than the menu board itself, that's a genuinely low bar that a shocking number of competitors still can't manage to clear. Second, those famous potatoes really are the real deal, not just marketing talk. Five Guys sources a huge share of its potatoes from growers in Idaho and Washington, cuts every single one fresh inside the store, and runs them through fryers that are used for nothing else on the entire menu. That's a genuinely labor-intensive process that most fast food chains gave up on decades ago in favor of frozen, pre-cut product shipped in from some distant warehouse hundreds of miles away. Third, the topping system genuinely works in your favor as long as you actually take advantage of it. More than 15 different toppings, all included at no extra charge whatsoever, means you can build a completely different burger on every single visit without ever paying a cent more for the privilege. Most fast food chains, by comparison, charge you extra for nearly every single add-on you request. Fourth, when this company actually messes up, it tends to own it in a real way rather than just issuing a quiet statement. Between the $1.5 million in employee bonuses after that chaotic birthday promotion and a starting wage that genuinely does beat a lot of the competition, there's evidence here of a company that at least tries to take care of the people working the grill, even if the follow-through on things like scheduled breaks clearly hasn't always matched the intention. So, is Five Guys actually worth it in this day and age? That depends entirely on how you order and exactly what you're comparing it to in your own life. Walk in expecting a quick, cheap, fast food lunch like you'd get anywhere else, and you're going to walk out feeling genuinely ripped off by the total on your receipt. Walk in understanding exactly what you're paying for, order smart, using the tricks we just covered, and treat it like the occasional splurge it's actually priced like these days. And there's still a genuinely good burger waiting for you behind that counter. Let us know down in the comments what state you're watching from, whether your local Five Guys has gotten better or gotten worse over the years in your experience, and which company you think we should investigate next on this channel. Until next time, stay sharp, stay skeptical, and secure your plate.